I've spent about $1,000 on 2 wheels and a wheelbase. What are my thoughts on it? Thud, thud, thud. Beep, beep. What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and I've spent the last 3 months in the Simagic Alpha Evo ecosystem and with these 2 wheels, so I guess it's about time I go ahead and talk about it. This is a bit of a not a review, if you will, as I like to typically do. I'll go through why I decided to go with the Simagic ecosystem, pick up the Alpha Evo as my wheelbase, and some thoughts now after these initial 3 months. This wheelbase and both wheel rims were bought by me using my own earned money. No sponsorships, no promo codes, nothing but a dude buying a product like a normal person. Now, before I go any further, I just want to go ahead and set some rules here because terminology can get way too confusing way too quick. When I say wheel, I'm referring to something like this, the steering wheel. When I say base, I mean the unit that is over there off screen right about now. You'll see it throughout the video. And that is the bit that does the force feedback and the communicating with the game type thing. So as I was getting back into sim racing after moving and now having the proper amount of space to dedicate to the rig, I decided it'd be a great time to update to a more modern wheelbase as a replacement for my old trusty rusty Fanatec Club Sport version 2 wheel, which I pretty much exclusively used the old like the original Fanatec Formula wheel rim on. I did also have a 330mm round wheel with the Club Sport hub, but I pretty much never used it because I hated the feel due to the extra weight and the base just couldn't support it. Now, for reference, that was pretty much the best belt-driven wheel you could get. That was really only eclipsed by the version 2.5 of the same wheelbase, which added in some extra torque. That was the end of the line for belt-driven wheels. They have been replaced by these direct drive wheelbases, which basically now just use a giant motor hooked up directly to one of these things with no need for torque multiplying belts or gear mechanisms or anything like that, which in theory should make them pretty much universally superior in terms of detail, speed, as well as being more reliable as there's just less moving parts to go wrong. In actual application, this is indeed the case, which is why pretty much every wheelbase outside the most entry-level wheel has gone this way. It's pretty much just a plain old better way to do it, which is part of the reason why it was time for me to upgrade at this point. Now, when looking for a new wheel and base, price and strength were the first considerations for me. These two are pretty much 100% hand in hand in today's market. And while I always will say, the ego does what the ego wants, more power is more power and more power is always more better, and that is technically correct, I also didn't see much of the need to go to the absolute highest end of the force market, as while the old Fanatec wheel wasn't as strong as I would like in an ideal scenario, it also wasn't like as a wet spaghetti noodle where I felt like I was just missing out and I wanted so much more. Realistically, I didn't need the strongest wheelbase out there. I didn't see the need for me to pay for that which I won't fully utilize the vast majority of the time anyways, which I figured this probably put me into the 12 to 18 Newton meter range for my new wheelbase, which is typically the middle or upper middle offering from most companies. From there, for me, it was about the first-party steering wheel options and third-party steering wheel support for down-the-road future expansion. I also don't have any need for console compatibility as I don't do any sim racing on consoles, so that was a total non-factor. That obviously would have changed the way I looked at things if I needed PlayStation or Xbox compatibility. And I also know that the seating position in my rig is more of a GT style seating position, a little bit more upright, so I don't really need a display on a steering wheel or anything like that because they're just not in my eye line anyways in the same way as if I had a Formula or prototype style seating position. So naturally, after using a Fanatec base for over a decade and a half, that should have been the likely favorite for the replacement. Except they don't really have a wheelbase in the segment of the market I was looking in. They charge a premium for their wheels, have a more locked-in ecosystem with less third-party options available, although that does seem to maybe potentially be getting better at some point. As well as I had a bunch of issues with customer service and getting replacement parts for my old Club Sport pedals way back when those were a thing. The whole ownership situation currently recently going on, I guess you could say. Pretty much a hard pass for me right out of the gate from Fanatec. Theoretically, I could have used some of the gear that I had and carried that forward, which would have made it a little bit more cost competitive, or I could have got a technically better base in terms of, the way it's positioned in the market and price and all that stuff. But personally, there was enough apathy towards everything there that I decided that I would just be better off selling off the old gear and putting it towards the upgrade. Now, as for the other contenders out there besides Simagic, which I obviously decided on down the road, Simcube and Aztec just weren't in the budget. They don't really target this marketplace, so that was that. Logitech was out because it's Logitech, and the sim racer in me says that if you're spending that kind of money on Logitech, you're doing something wrong. Moza's options just didn't particularly appeal to me, particularly on the steering wheel side of things. My overall takeaway after looking at things and watching some reviews and reading some reviews and general community sentiment on it was that I probably would have been perfectly happy going with the wheelbase and an R12 if I went this route. But the thing that I was let down by and just not interested in was the wheel offerings. Their first-party wheels just didn't appeal to me in any capacity, and I just didn't really particularly like the aesthetic that they have. And I really don't like the idea of getting a third-party wheel right out of the gate with a brand new wheelbase. Like, that just seems asking for trouble at some point with something. So I didn't want to go down that route. So VRS and Conspit both made up the more realistic contenders for my money and perhaps the more exciting options. And maybe if I were more adventurous, this would have been the route I would have gone with. My main concern with both of these companies and reason why I ultimately couldn't pull the trigger on either one and decided to go with Simagic was down to just wanting a more mainstream wheel that was something that you get a little bit more community there. There's a little bit more mass there. You feel like there's a little bit more safety there. I think both VRS and Conspit have interesting products at competitive price points that make sense for what I was looking for. And I feel like they're overall very well regarded. But I just couldn't get over the fact that they are likely the smallest install base in a crowded market. And that just kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. While that wasn't the direct order of events and how I evaluated things, it's pretty accurate as to my final thoughts on their offerings out there, and that's how I came to decide to go with the Simagic Alpha Evo. The reviews and general sentiment in the community is overall quite positive. The price point was competitive. There was the bigger user base that I desired. Their first-party wheel offerings were more in line with my taste, and there's good support for third-party wheels out there. It just overall seemed like the right fit for me and overall the right package. So the question then became one of putting it all together. It was very difficult to decide if I was going to go with the mid-level Alpha Evo 12 Newton meter version or the Pro 18 Newton meter version. There is always the paranoia of underbuying and the subsequent regret months later. So this was a tough decision. Was it worth the extra $150? This one took a long while to decide because on one hand, $150 in the grand scheme of things, something that I plan on using for years, not really a huge ordeal, but do I really need it? And I decided in my use case, I don't wear gloves. I have no intention of wearing gloves. I don't want to wear gloves. I have a light grip anyways because I just like to have a light grip on the wheel. I know my old steering wheel at its max was fully clipping at around like 7 Newton meters. And, roughly that was the power that I was comfortable with for mid-level corner steering effort. So it was pretty hard to justify the extra expense for what was going to end up becoming just extra headroom for force feedback spikes. Wheel-wise, the question was FX Pro or GT Neo, which was eventually decided in favor of the GT Neo. I really thought about the FX Pro before convincing myself and reminding myself that a display on the wheel for my seating position is cool, but pretty useless. Like, it just doesn't work out the best. And therefore, I didn't need to spend the extra money. There is also the screenless FX wheel, but it looks weird to me given that it's like the FX Pro but without the screen, and it just looks weird. And it's also more expensive than the GT Neo for basically the same thing, pretty much an automatic disqualifier. Now, given with the Fanatec equipment, I use the Formula wheel on my old base 99.9% of the time, regardless of if I was, doing oval racing or rally racing or power sliding around. Like, maybe I might know how to drift eventually at some point if I actually tried. The round wheel on that thing just felt like crap, so I decided, hey, you know what? Must be a Formula wheel guy. We're going to just go ahead and go with the GT Neo because That's the only type of wheel I needed before, so let's go ahead and stick with that. So now that I've been running this setup for 3 months, do I have any regret? The answer is no. Slightly yes, but no. I'm not going to give you one of those buzzword BS YouTube reviews, because honestly, I don't even know how you properly measure a force feedback wheel for a proper review with empirical data, so I'm not going to even bother attempting to do that. But what I will say on the base side of things, especially coming from, the Fanatec Club Sport wheel, which was belt-driven wheel, no regrets. Coming from that old wheel, the difference between that and the modern direct drive is, in my opinion, greatly overstated in the sim racing community. The real advantage is the wheel reacts quicker, it's sharper, which helps make things a little bit easier when it comes to saving slides and driving the car. You simply don't need to help the wheel out as much, and it helps makes corrections easier. It's like there was a filter on the old wheel, like a little bit of a damper, rather than anything radically different. Again, comparing a higher end, pretty much end of the road in terms of belt-driven wheels compared to a mid-upper tier direct drive wheel, I don't think there's that big of a difference. Yes, the direct drive is superior. Yes, it's the way to go. Yes, this is a superior technology, but if you have a belt-driven wheel, I don't feel like you need to throw it out immediately because direct drive is that much better. That isn't to say that there isn't more texture and feel in there through the wheel, but this is not a, oh my god, I can drive properly now, like at times I've seen it portrayed. I can maybe see that reaction if you're coming from an entry-level gear-driven Logitech G29 or G920 or whatever the heck it is at this point, but a quality belt-driven wheel, the differences really aren't that big. Now, as for going with the weaker 12 Newton meter version, I'm actually perfectly happy with the middle strength base in the Alpha Evo lineup. For the most part, I typically aim for a level of steering effort that I'd estimate to be around 8 to 10 Newton meters in smoother, high-speed corners, and I do that by adjusting the in-game gain to set my wheel force feedback strength. I leave it maxed out in the control software. That leaves me a little bit of headroom for spikes over bumps and curbs and all that stuff. Generally on the ovals, I'll also try and lower it down a little bit because it's just easier. It's force feedback on ovals isn't as important or critical for me, so I just like to have it a little bit less, as it's a little bit more comfortable for me to drive with, given that you're always doing left-hand turns and all that stuff. Honestly, had I gone with the stronger base, I probably would still be targeting a same level of steering effort, as that's what feels comfortable for me for extended play without wearing gloves. And again, I'm not interested in wearing gloves, so that's kind of where I'm capped out and feel good at. I was slightly concerned that a heavier wheel would go ahead and overwhelm the wheelbase in a similar way to the old Fanatec base, but that's turned out to be pretty much a non-issue. So honestly, the part I expected to potentially regret and be the most, we'll see about it, I'm actually perfectly fine with now 3 months later. Now, as for some other things I want to go ahead and talk about here really quick related to the base, one of the neatest features of the Alpha Evo is the built-in magnets. I feel like this needs to be talked about more. This should become the standard for every single wheelbase because this is just a much better way of doing things. Now, eventually, Simagic is supposedly, maybe, potentially, finally, eventually, like everybody knows that it's coming, but they haven't really done anything with it. A magnetic dashboard that is what the magnets are intended for. It seems really weird that this wheel has been out for, I think, like a year and a half, somewhere thereabouts, and this still hasn't happened because it's such a great feature. It's just like, it's perfect. But if you're like me, you can just go ahead and get yourself a suitable display, put some double-sided tape on the back of that, put some magnets on there, and then presto, you fire up Simhub, instant dashboard that's easily removed. You can get at your replay controls with ease. It's not blocking your screen when you don't want it to be blocking your screen. It's there and set up in a convenient viewing factor and viewing window. Like, it's just, this is an S-tier edition, even though maybe it's not like, it's magnets. Like, let's be real. You could do pretty much the same on any base. I don't know why they don't do the same on any base, because now that I've experienced having magnets there, it just makes so much sense. Like, this is an S-tier edition feature, as I'm saying. Now, speaking of Simhub, though, and that, of course, relates, I'll talk about that later when I get to the wheels, because that's an issue. Now, as for the second dumbest issue, that has to go with the ring light on the wheelbase. Now, this light can be bound to different telemetry functions, and you can have different colors and flashes and all sorts of things in the control software, which it sounds cool, it looks cool in theory, but in actual application, it's pretty much entirely useless as you can't see the thing while you are driving. It's a glorified power indicator. I don't know what angle you would have to be sitting at to actually find this thing useful. It's just, you can't see what's behind your wheel. Like, how many fingers am I holding up? Exactly. You don't know. You can't tell because it's hidden. It's obstructed. Your vision is obstructed. It's a total goober of a feature. And of course, lastly, on the wheelbase side of things, there's always the question, am I faster? The answer is no, of course not, because this isn't golf where you buy skill in the form of hardware, you silly Billy. It don't work that way. Now onto the wheels, because I've got two of them. Initially, I started with the GT Neo as that was the natural fit as someone who ran a Formula wheel quite literally all the time. It is often regarded as the undisputed value king of the hill to the point where there is clear imitations on the same exact formula coming from every single competitor out there in the marketplace. It's a really good wheel. Personally though, I'm kind of a little lukewarm on it because of highly personal reasons. Now this wheel features a 300 millimeter diameter, a pair of magnetic shift paddles, and an additional pair of analog paddles that can be toggled between dual or independent in the control software. Really would have liked to see a physical switch on the wheel because that'd be far more handy. And a bunch of easy to access buttons and a rotary at each thumb tip, 4 big old knobs, and of course all these buttons are RGB and you can control them in the control software. The grips themselves are pretty varied. There are apparently 2 revisions of this wheel, and the big difference is the grips, and which one you're going to end up with is probably the version 2 at this point, which is generally regarded as the less great version. Mine are pretty hard, but they got kind of a slightly rubbery type of feel. It feels fine in my hands. However, there's an annoying mold seam on the sides that you can feel and just can kind of be a little bit irritating at times. It's not a big problem, but it's annoying enough. I'm probably going to go ahead and wrap the grips in tennis tapes, as a lot of people have done, because that's a fun $5 customization, plus a little extra much needed softness and maybe some extra thickness will help out. And amongst the issue I'm about to talk about. The issue I have is a bit more personal. I've had pretty severe, at times, hand cramping in my left hand and thumb pain in my left hand when using this wheel for a longer session. Like an hour, 2 hours, that's when it happens. I'm pretty darn sure, like 99% sure, it's due to my natural tendency to have my left thumb not hooked in, but instead running vertically up the grip, as that's just my natural grip. So I'm kind of gripping it like a Lego man with the meat of my hand entirely, pretty much. And you'll see, I'll put a picture in here. There's basically a flat part right here, and then it's a hard, like 90-degree corner, and that's right where my thumb is, and it puts pressure on there, and it's not nice. It just doesn't work out for my highly personal grip. Unfortunately, it is what it is. You know, this is one of those things where, most of you guys probably grip the wheel like a normal person, but that's just how I hold on to the wheel, and it just doesn't feel the best for extended play. 30-minute races, not a problem, but once I start getting up to an hour, it's like, it starts to be annoying. And that's why, again, I'll probably put some tennis tape on there to hopefully maybe make this a little bit softer, a little bit easier on the thumb, as I think that'll help out. But ergonomic fail, I guess you could say there. Additionally, I will say, and this is not against this wheel at all, I can't use this as the one-wheel wonder like I could with the old Fanatec Formula rim. I find this very tricky to grab in big opposite lock situations like when you're doing rally racing, because even though it's a similar diameter to that wheel, the shape itself is much smaller, and it makes it much more difficult to grab and like get your hand in the right place in those types of situations. I'm not going to go ahead and like slight the wheel for that, because this is obviously not intended for that type of usage, but I did it successfully, perfectly fine with the Fanatec version of like the same concept of the wheel. So like kind of disappointed it didn't work as well, but it is doable. It's just, hey, again, that's not me sliding the wheel. Like we're not holding it against it because that's not the tool for that job. Now, as for the other wheel, with the release of Assetto Corsa Rally, I decided this base is going to need a round wheel, as well as it's going to be capable of driving a heavier wheel than the GT Neo. So I decided to pick up the 330T with the Neo hub, which, sidebar, Simagic. Can we get like actual names here? And just general sim racing community, like product people, like, can we get actual names that make sense and are easy to understand? Like, what's a 330T? What's the T stand for? I still don't understand. Like, what's... There is no T on this product. But anyways, this is a round 330 millimeter diameter wheel with a slight dish to it. Nothing major, not a deep dish drift wheel or anything like that, but there is just a little dish there. You get the orange stitching going all around and the center stripe right up here. And it's got a nice semi-soft feeling like leather or fake leather or something like that. I don't know what this material is because I'm not a materials expert at all. So there's that. What I will say is I don't feel like this is going to like wear out in an instant or have like particular issues. There is kind of a concern I have just on the backside here with the way that they've like glued it on, which I'll include a picture here. But I don't know if that's a long-term thing to keep an eye on or if that's just, it's out of the way, so you shouldn't need to worry about it, is my figuring. But anyways, you get the same type of buttons, RGB, backlit, controllable in the software. You get the two, I think they're called 7-way switches that you can do the twisty things to. With that, you get the two larger knobs down here with the two encoders. You do lose out some buttons from the GT Neo in terms of just button count, and you also got the same magnetic paddle shifters with the same pair of analog paddles down here. And just like the GT Neo, no physical button or anything like that to control what mode that they work in, which I think is a huge missed opportunity. I don't know how difficult that is to implement, but I feel like that's a great feature that would be nice to have that would improve the usability of the wheel pretty quickly there. So yeah, there's that. Really not much to talk about as far as wheels go, because this is kind of just your basic jack of all trades, master of none, standard racing wheel. Like, this is the basic racing wheel. And that's more or less that. Now, personally, this has become my preferred wheel over the GT Neo, as it's just more comfortable in my hands. Even discounting that issue in like shorter races, like it just feels better in the hand. I like the larger diameter. I feel like it helps slow down my hands a little bit, and I'm a little bit less of aggressive and a little less shaky in the wheel. Yes, it is definitely much less usable in terms of button layouts, but that's always going to happen with a wheel like this compared to something like the GT Neo or a Formula wheel where everything's at your thumb. But I don't really need that much button access for the way I play games. So, like it's not that big of a factor. So I kind of gravitate towards this guy. The only thing I will say is I kind of wish there was like an option that was like this wheel, this size and feel and everything, but just like chopped off at the top, but not one of the U-shaped wheels, because I think those things are ugly. Like not an oval one either. Like I don't know. Like I just feel like that wheel that I'm looking for just doesn't quite exist. So yeah, there's that. But anyways, yeah, I like this guy. Now, both wheels can be controlled and configured in the software to change the button colors and schemes. You can also go ahead and configure the buttons to flash based on certain telemetry functions, which is a nice feature to have right out of the box. However, in practice, I find the buttons, even at 100% maximum brightness, are dim enough that it's not really all that useful to bother. Even in a dark room, I probably wouldn't notice them flashing from my seating position. Now, I would say if you would get more use out of this function if you had a more formula style seating position where the wheel is, much higher in your eye line. That, of course, though, leads to Simhub, as technically both wheels, the button colors and all that stuff can be controlled by Simhub, so you can have all sorts of cool like patterns and all that pop up, and like when you're on the pit speed limiter, you can have everything flash and do patterns and sweet stuff like that. And it does work. I can confirm, it does work. You will need an extra USB cable coming out of the back of the wheelbase for starters, but that's pretty much it, except for the dumb parts. Now, right now, there is the way you do this to enable USB mode is what they call it, so that way you can control the wheel through Simhub. You either put tape on the wheel side of the quick release, which just seems like a bad idea from a long-term usage perspective. So I've avoided that one because, yes, that's like the official response, but it just seems like not the thing you're supposed to do. You can also go ahead and enter USB mode by holding down a button like this when you connect the wheel onto the base. There's also another button on this wheel that does the exact same thing. I can't remember which one it is because honestly, I don't know if I've tried this since I first did it, so I don't even know what button it is off the top of my head on this guy. And then the wheel will boot into USB mode, so you can control it from Simhub. That's all fine and dandy and everything, but I don't know about you guys, but I do know about myself, and that is there's a 50-50 chance that when I connect the wheel, I'm going to actually do that. That's probably not going to happen. And because of the fact that I know for a fact that my odds of doing that are not 100%, therefore it's pretty hard to actually particularly be interested in it, because I know for a fact that if I get reliant upon it and if I actually use it for the cool stuff that it's capable of, I'm going to miss out when I forget about it that one time, because that will happen. And again, putting the tape on the wheel side is like the official solution, but my God, that is incredibly hacky, to say the least. It would really just be nice if there was a way to figure out if we could just go ahead and like have USB mode. You set it to USB mode and then it just sticks in that mode automatically by default from there on, or if you could do something with the wheelbase to tell it in the software that you always want to connect by USB. I feel like there's a number of issues that we should not be having to tape the wheelbase or hold down buttons when we put the wheel on. It just, why? why you do that? But yeah, but wrapping things up here, the grand total about $1,050 somewhere thereabouts for the two wheels, the Alpha Evo 12 newton meter base. And I feel like in the grand scheme of things in sim racing, the landscape of things that the way that they are right now, I don't feel like I left anything on the table, which is always the good thing. Like, yes, there's the issue with, the GT Neo just not being the greatest of fits for me, myself and I. But in the grand scheme of things, like, it's not an issue in a 30-minute race, which is primarily how I'm going to be racing anyway. So I'm not going to hold it against it too terribly hard. But, like, I don't have regret, which is always a good thing when you're spending what is a sizable chunk of change, so pretty pleased with that. So, again, this isn't like a review, but just general opinions, and that's kind of just my general thoughts on that. Maybe there would have been something better, maybe there would have been a technically better way to go, but I'm happy, and that's what matters. So, anyways, let me know what you guys think. Yeah, fun times. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. All right, bye.